Shalom and welcome, my Hebrews and Shalomi homies. Let's see if I can adjust you. There you go. We're in a hotel because hashtag on the road, but we are reading our word. So if you have one of these busted out, flip it to page 318. If you don't have one of these and you want one, you can get it at bearindependent.com in the store at our cost. And if you have one of these, or don't have one of these, but you want one and you don't have the money, you just email us at admin@bearindependent.com. Tell us where to send you one, and we'll send you one. No questions asked. Just send a address in the email so that we know where to send you, because a lot of times people forget that, and we don't need a massive diatribe as to why you can't afford one. Just say, hey, I need a copy of the scriptures. Here's my address, and the team will get one to you. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 3. We've dealt in Samuel 1 and 2 Samuel to this point with the death of Shaul, King Saul, and Jonathan, David's very, very, very good friend. Some have hypothesized his homosexual lover. I don't believe that's the case for reasons stated in last week's video. If you haven't seen that, go watch that. But anyway, there's now some disarray because the king is dead. There's been this massive battle, and many in Israel want David to be the king, and many in Israel don't want David to be the king. And so there's some clannish infighting here, and we're just gonna read it. So starting in chapter 3, and the fighting between the house of Shaul, King Saul, and the house of David was long drawn out. But David was going on and was strong, and the house of Shaul was going on and was weak. And sons were born to David in Hebron. And his firstborn was Amnon, by Ahinoam the Yisraelites, and his second Caleb by Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maachah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. Oh, an additional wife here. And the fourth, Adoniah, son of Haggith, an additional wife. And the fifth, Shephatiah, son of Avital. And the sixth, an additional wife. And the sixth, Yishraim, by David's wife Eglah, an additional wife. And these were born to David in Hebron. If David, and I'm not saying he was, but if he was homosexual, where did all these freaking wives come from? He was just covering up for it. Okay, whatever. What does the Bible say? And Shaul had a concubine, whose name was Ritzpah, daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? Ishbosheth being the remaining living son of Shaul. Saul, I believe, had 4 sons, and 3 of them are dead at this point. And Abner, who was Saul's general, basically, Saul's son is accusing his general of sleeping with his dad's concubine. And Abner was very displeased at the words of Ishbosheth and said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah, that I show loving commitment to the house of Shaul your father, to his brothers, and to all his friends today, and have not let you fall into the hand of David, that you charge me today with a sin concerning this woman? He's like, dude, after everything I've done for you, kept you alive, now you're going to accuse me of this sin. He didn't say, no, I didn't do that. He said, dude, after everything I've done for you, yeah. That's almost indicative to me, based on human nature, that, yeah, he did do that. Elohim does so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as Yahweh has sworn to him, to cause the reign to pass over from the house of Saul, and to raise up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba. So, Abner says, yo man, after everything I've done for you, you're going to accuse me of this. Elohim does so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as Yahweh has sworn to him. It's like, you know what? I'm switching teams here. So this is Abner saying to Saul's son, you know what? I'm team David now. To cause the reign to pass over from the house of Shaul. The kingdom is going to pass from the house of Saul and raise up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba. So Abner's like, you got it. Got it. Team David. We're going to raise him up as king. And he, Ishbosheth, was unable to answer Abner another word because he feared him. And Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David, saying, whose is the land? Saying also, make your covenant with me and see my hand is with you to bring all of Israel to you. I'm Team David, bro. Sends a couple messengers. And David says, good, I make a covenant with you. Only one matter I'm asking of you. You do not see my face unless you bring Michal, daughter of Shaul, when you come see my face, who he was promised. David was promised as a wife, but Shaul, being a PP head, did not allow that to happen. David then sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Shaul, saying, give me my wife Michal, to whom I became engaged for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, Paltiel, son of Laish. But her husband went with her to Bahurim, going on and weeping behind her. And Abner said to him, go, turn back. And so Abner rebuked this dude. He's like, that's not your wife, turn back. And Abner had a word with the elders of Israel, saying, in time past you were seeking for David to be king over you, and now do it. For Yahweh has spoken to David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. And Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and all the house of Benjamin. So Abner's on a Team David tour of the elders of Israel at this point, going, hey, you guys wanted David to be king. Let's raise him up as king. I'm Team David now too. He's getting his wife back from Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth, that you can see the power is passing away from the house of Shaul, from the house of Saul, into the house of David. And so Abner's on this PR campaign, essentially. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. And Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel and all the house of Benjamin. So after speaking with all of the leaders of Israel, now he comes to David to speak in the hearing of David, to report back. And Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron. And David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, let me arise and go and gather all Israel to my master the king, the sovereign, and let them make a covenant with you, and you shall reign over all that your being desires. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So he had the covering of David's house because David prepared a feast for him. So he was good to go there. Like, David agrees that Abner is on Team David. And Abner's like, look, I talked to all. So Abner leaves the house of Shaul. He tells the remaining son of Shaul, hey, no go. You treat me rough like that, we can't be friends anymore. And so he bounces out. He goes on a PR campaign for David throughout the land. All the leaders of Israel, they're like, yeah, we're on board. He comes to David. David receives him, prepares him a feast. He says, yep, I'm good to go. Abner says, cool, I'm going to go get with all those leaders. We're going to make this thing happen. I'm going to execute on your authority. Verse 22, and see, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. So Joab, who is David's general, was out in the field, right? And so they're coming back from a raid. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away and had gone in peace. And Joab, David's general, remember, Shaul's general was Abner. And so if you allow me to use these terms loosely, general, okay? So Joab, David's general, comes back from a raid, and Abner's not there. And Joab and all the army that was with him came, and they reported to Joab, saying, Abner, son of Ner, came to the sovereign, came to the king, and he sent him away, and he's gone in peace. They're like, dude, our mortal enemy was here. He met with the king, and now he's been sent away in peace. And so Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? See, Abner has come to you. Why is it that you sent him away? He's already gone. You know that Abner, son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, to know all that you are doing. And so going out and coming in is a Hebrew term for going to war. And so Joab is at this point saying that Abner was on a recon. He came to get a look inside your camp to see what you've got going on, to know what moves you're going to make. Because Joab, having not been there, doesn't know that Abner is Team David. He didn't see the man. He didn't experience his conviction. And so his take on it is, this guy, regardless of what his mouth might say, his heart is still aligned with the house of Shaul. He's going to bring fire and brimstone down on the house of David. Joab then left David, and he sent messengers after Abner, who brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David didn't know it. So David's general sends some guys out, and they go abduct Abner. Thus Abner returned to Hebron, and Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately. So 2 generals. And there stuck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. So Joab gives him one of these outside the gate. Because Joab, his brother, was killed in this battle. I don't remember if it was Abner or not directly that killed him, but I think that it was. In fact, Abner, yes, it was Abner. It's 2 Samuel 2:21. And Abner said to him, turn aside your right hand to your left and lay hold of the young man and take his armor for yourself. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner again said to Asahel, turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I face your brother Joab? But he refused to turn aside, and Abner struck him with the blunt end of the spear in his stomach, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell down there and died on the spot. And it came to be that as many as came to that place where Asahel fell down and died, stood still. It was so grievous an injury that people were paused by it when they saw it. And so now Joab finally has got Abner in front of him, who murdered his brother. Murdered. It was war. Killed his brother. And so Joab, verse 27, 3:27, thus Abner returned to Hebron, and Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately. And there stuck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. And when David heard of it afterwards, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before Yahweh forever for the blood of Abner, son of Ner. Abner was Team David. Joab wasn't having it. Joab didn't care about whether or not Abner was Team David. He was getting blood retribution for the death of his brother. So back to what David's saying, 29, let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or is a leper, or who is taking a hold of a staff, or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother killed Abner, because he had killed their brother Asahel at Givon in battle. And David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your garments, gird yourselves with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. So David curses the house of Joab. This was not approved by David. So David curses the house of Joab. And then he says, you will tear your garments. You will mourn the death of this guy that you killed, even if he did kill your brother. And King David followed the coffin in the funeral procession. And they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the burial site of Abner, and all the people wept. And the sovereign, the king, sang a lament over Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Interesting point here. Just pause all of this. Let's talk about the word sovereign for a minute. How many people have heard the phrase sovereign citizen, or I have sovereignty over my life? That means you are the king of your life. You should act that way. Now, what I mean by this is your spiritual being, your life should be dedicated to the King, the Master, Yeshua, Messiah. But here on earth, you should function in such a way that the only authority that you as king respond to is the spiritual authority over you. Yeshua, Jesus, and Yahweh our Elohim, the Lord our God. That's it. You can go all the way back to Genesis 2, that man was created to rule and subdue the earth and all the animals and the beasts of the field in it. Man was not created to rule over man. You were not created to have another man rule over you. And your lack of kingship, your lack of headship here on earth creates a lot of downstream ramifications. That idea of being sovereign means one must conduct themselves as a king. You are a king of the kingdom that the Father has blessed you with here on earth, to execute headship, leadership, and stewardship over the people and the land and the animals and the things the Father has blessed you with. You're subservient only to the Father and his risen Son. Remember that, because the world's going to get really scary in the years ahead. The very days will be shortened because the elect will be deceived. Yeah. Learn to let people feel the weight of you. Oh, you killed that guy? You will mourn for him, and your house is cursed forever. Let people feel the weight of you. That authority doesn't come from man. It comes from the Creator, and it's vested in you. That is the part of you, that eternal spiritual spark of a soul that's fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of the Creator. Not these bodies that see corruption. These physical bodies that see corruption are a result of the fall of man in the garden, because he shirked his responsibility of kingship over, dominion over, headship over this earth. That's a whole nother story. But everywhere you see this word sovereign, remember what sovereign means. It means king. So if you are a sovereign citizen, if you have sovereignty over your life, act like it. It's my encouragement to you. And the sovereign, the king, sang a lament over Abner and said, "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put into shackles. As one falls before sons of evil, so you fell." And all the people wept over him again. And all the people came to cause David to eat food while it was still day. But David swore, saying, "Elohim, do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or whatever else till the sun goes down." I'm not eating. I'm in mourning. Like, all right, yeah, we buried Abner. You hungry? It's like, no, I'm in mourning. And all the people took note of it. And it was good in their eyes, since whatever the king did was good in the eyes of all the people. And all the people and all Israel knew that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner, son of Ner. Because again, people felt the weight of him they could see. This was not some underhanded plot to remove Abner, because he made a public spectacle of the house of Joab, saying, "You will mourn. You will tear your garments and mourn." Right? There were ramifications for their actions. The sovereign also said to his servants, "Do you not know that a prince and a great one has fallen in Israel today? And I am weak today, though anointed king. And these men, the sons of Seruiah, are too harsh for me. Let Yahweh repay the evildoer according to his evil." And the son of Shaul heard that Abner had died in Hebron. This is chapter 4. And he lost heart. This be Ishbosheth. The son of Shaul heard that Abner had died in Hebron. And he lost heart. And all Israel was troubled. So now the house of Shaul no longer has Abner, so they don't even have their military strength. And they've got this weak son of Shaul. So they don't have political strength. They don't have military strength. And the son of Shaul had two men, commanders of bands, and the name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth was also reckoned to Benjamin, because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim, and have been sojourners there until this day. Now Jonathan, son of Shaul, had a son who was lame in his feet, and he was 5 years old when the news about Shaul and Jonathan came from Yisrael. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to be, as she hurried to flee, that she fell and became lame. That he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth. So as far as the line of the house of Shaul, you've got this lame 5-year-old, Mephibosheth, and you've got Ishbosheth. And there's some dudes that are like commanders of bands, right? Is that what it said? Commanders of bands, like captains, essentially. And the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, went and came about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. So these captains of the house of Shaul, and they come to Ishbosheth's house in the middle of the day. It's hot, right? And he's laying on his bed. And they came into the middle of the house, the midst of the house, to fetch wheat. And they struck him in the stomach. And Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. So they came to steal some wheat, and they struck him in the stomach. Thus they came into the house when he was lying on his bed in his bedroom, and they struck him and slew him and beheaded him. And they took his head and went away, and went the way of the desert plain all night, and brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the sovereign, see the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul your enemy, who sought your life. So Yahweh has given my master the king vengeance on Shaul and his seed this day. So these guys, these commanders, these captains of the house of Shaul, break into Ishbosheth's house in the middle of the day to steal some wheat. He's laying on his bed. He wakes up. They strike him in the stomach, and then they kill him. Now they've killed this guy, and they're like, what do we do? So they cut his head off as proof of the fact that he's dead. They're like, we'll take it to David, and David, since he's king now, will reward us for killing the son of his enemy, Ishbosheth. Now that guy's taken care of. No longer does David have to worry about the house of Shaul, because this guy's dead. And David, verse 9, answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothites, and said to them, as Yahweh lives, who has ransomed my life out of all distress, when someone reported to me, saying, see, Shaul is dead, and he was a bearer of good news in his own eyes, then I took hold of him and killed him in Siklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. And he's like, with Yah as my witness, when somebody told me Shaul was dead and I should be happy about it, I killed them. How much more when wrong men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, should I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? This, by the way, is Torah. David is not great at Torah. He's not perfect at it. Newsflash, none of us are. But in this case, what we call right ruling, which is a literal translation of justice, rightly ruling the law, aka justice. He's like, you went into this guy's house, you murdered him, and then you brought me his head thinking I'm going to be happy about it. How much more when wrong men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed, should I not now require his blood at your hand and remove you from the earth? And David commanded his young men, and he killed them, and they killed them, and cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. And they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the burial site of Abner in Hebron. So these guys were killed, not directly by the hand of David, but at his command, for killing a righteous man in his own house. They earned death. They got it. But they also cut off their hands and feet to make an example out of him. And they hung him at the pool in Hebron. This isn't like the community pool where everybody goes to swim. This is where you go to get water so you don't die, for you and your animals. So everybody saw it. So it was understood that David did not sanction the killing of Ishbosheth. And I guess we'll do 5 too. And all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and spoke, saying, look, we are your bone and your flesh. Formerly, when Shaul was sovereign over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. You were the one who went to war, bro. And Yahweh said to you, shepherd my people, Israel, and be ruler over all Israel. And all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and sovereign David made a covenant with them at Hebron before Yahweh. And they anointed David sovereign over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 new moons, 7.5 years. And in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. 2 house, Judah and Israel. Remember that, because that 2-house thing matters. It matters way more than we can get into now. But the Yehudim, the Jews, Judah, what people know as Jews today, Jewish, that's just one of 12 tribes of Israel, of the Hebrews, of the Father's chosen people. They don't have a monopoly on following the word of Yah. And many people say, oh, you do that Jewish stuff. Nope, I do Hebrew stuff. The Jewish stuff is in many ways what Messiah came to rail against in the first place. It's the doctrines and dogmas of men that were nailed to a cross in Colossians 2. The Jewish stuff, not the Father's perfect law. But anyway, this 2-house concept here. You should look that up, research that, DuckDuckGo it, or whatever you prefer. You should research 2-house. It's important, and it has a lot to do with being grafted into the tree of life, which every one of us former heathens should be very appreciative of, because once you are grafted in, you're no longer a heathen. You're now part of Israel, and Israel's good. It's good to be Israel, not the nation state on the map Israel, but the Father's chosen people Israel. Defined in Genesis 32 as he who is struggling with Elohim, he who is overcoming with Elohim, and he who is ruling, Adamic covenant, Genesis 2, with Elohim. So, and if you don't think that matters, read Revelation, specifically Revelation 2, 3, and 4, and underline all the places where it says, to he who overcomes. That's Israel. That's us. If we believe in Messiah and we're grafted into the tree of life, this 2-house system. But yeah, huge diatribe. Verse 6, and the sovereign, the king, and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land. They're like, you know what? We're going to set up shop in Jerusalem. Oh yeah, the Jebusites. What shall we do about them? And they, the Jebusites, spoke to David, saying, except you take away the blind and the lame, you're not going to come in here. They're like, even the blind and the lame could defend against David, thinking David is not going to come in here. But David captured the stronghold of Zion, the city of David. Yeah. And David said on that day, anyone who strikes the Jebusites, let him go by the water shaft and take the lame and the blind who are hated by David's soul. That is why they say the blind and the lame do not come into the house. So there's one little passage here, and it's expanded upon elsewhere, I think specifically Chronicles. But rather than a full frontal assault, David's like, okay, the blind and the lame, got it. We're coming for your blind and your lame. And they went in through the water shafts. They snuck in through the water shafts. Rather than trying to, storm the bulwarks. No, they infiltrated. And I believe it says elsewhere that they had to use their daggers, not their swords, because they were in close proximity, right? And David dwelt in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built all around from the Millo and inward. And David went on and became great. And Yahweh Elohim of hosts was with him. Now Hiram, the king of Sor, or Tyre, it's also written in other translations, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons. And they built a house, or a palace, or a whatever you want to call it. It was where David reigned from. Built a house for David. And David knew that Yahweh had established him as sovereign over Israel, and that he had exalted his reign because of his people Israel. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he had come from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these were the names of those born to him in Jerusalem: Shammua, and Shovav, and Nathan, and Shalomah, and Yihar, and Elishua, and Nepheg, and Yaphiah, and Elishama, and Eliada, and Eliphelet. And the Philistines heard that they had anointed, that they, Israel, had anointed David over Israel, and all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard and went down to the stronghold. And the Philistines came and spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim. The Rephaites, valley of giants, descendants from the Nephilim and the Anakim. Yeah, giants. Corrupted flesh. Genesis 6:4. And David inquired of Yahweh, saying, Do I go up against the Philistines? Are we going to go have a fight? Do you give them into my hand? And Yahweh said to David, Go up, for I shall certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And David came to Baal Perazim, and David struck them there. And he said, Yahweh has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. And so he called that place Baal Perazim. And they left their images there, and David and his men took them away. Their images, their idols, their carved idols. So the Philistines got their butts beat so bad that when they turned and ran, they left their false idols on the field. And David and his men went and took them away. And the Philistines came up again, and they were spread out in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of Yahweh, he said, Do not go up. Turn around behind them, and you shall come upon them in front of the mulberry trees. I think other translations have it as poplar trees. And it shall be when you hear the sound of stepping in the tops of the mulberry trees, then act promptly, for then Yahweh shall go out before you and strike the camp of the Philistines. And David did so, as Yahweh commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Giva as far as Gezer. So they come out the first time. David meets them face to face on the battlefield. They bump heads, and the Philistines take off and run. Well, now here they come again. And he's like, all right, Yah, what do we do? Do we meet him again on the battlefield? And Yah says, no, you go up around him. So they do one of these. As the Philistines are coming this way, they come around from behind them and then attack from the rear. And David did as Yahweh commanded and smote the Philistines from Geba as far as Gezer. Now, also interestingly here, the Jebusites. The Jebusites, we know from the book of Joshua, were some of the people in the land of Canaan that were supposed to be eliminated and weren't. And so in Joshua 15, verse 63, what the heck is making that noise? There you go. If you slap your mini fridge, it stops making that noise. Joshua 15, 63. And as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah were unable to drive them out. So the Jebusites have dwelt with the children of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. And there's many important people that have Jebusite background in the Bible. That's an interesting study as well. Yeah. Nathan being one of them, I believe. So, whole different story. Different story for a different time. Anyway, we're going to leave it there today. We're going to, that'll be it for this particular portion of 2 Samuel. Put a little note here at 6 so we know to pick up there next time. I appreciate y'all. Please make sure you're reading your word when we do this, because I am not your pastor, your priest, or your rabbi. I am just Brother Bear. Bless y'all. Shalom.